and welcome to Nerds and Nodes, the Mac AI podcast. This year we're hosted by Dr. Jodie Lobana, a distinguished professor and researcher of AI governance. This podcast is for those of you who are interested in learning all about artificial intelligence and its countless applications in the fields of science, business, engineering, and more. Each episode will have a different expert come in and cover a variety of topics, including their own experiences and career path, current developments in AI, real-world applications of their work, and even some speculations for the future. If you're interested in hearing advice directly from the experts in AI, then this is a podcast for you. For today's episode, Jodie has invited Andres Rojas, an experienced strategist leading complex transformations in multinational enterprises, to discuss the adoption of AI in the tech industry and emerging career paths for students/graduates.
So welcome, Andres, to Nerds and Nodes podcast of McMaster AI Society. We are so excited to have you here. Before we start to talk everything artificial intelligence, I want to know about the human, Andres, who is now the director of applied AI projects at Vector Institute and it's a very prestigious position with Vector. Vector is Canada's one of the top AI institutes in Canada. And can you please tell us a bit about your human journey as you came from, I think, very excellent background in risk management to being the director of AI projects at Vector?
Thanks, Jodie, and thanks for having me. I think my journey basically started studying engineering, industrial engineering, and as part of that, I actually did study specifically. I specialized in machine learning, and so I did study deep learning back in the day, but in the early 2000s, it was extremely expensive. I did consulting in this space for a couple of years with banks and hotels, government. So I did a couple of things in that space, but it was a very difficult area to play in because, it was expensive. And I remember having spent a week coding things like clustering algorithms or things like that now you can do literally in seconds, right? So after that, then I started working in the financial industry. And there I focus on process design, process automation, process optimization. And from that journey, basically, I did an MBA in the UK, and then I came to Canada to work for one of the banks here. And in that space, I continued doing a lot of things around implementing processes. I did a few machine learning algorithms along the way. And finally, I shifted a little bit more towards operational risk to try to understand what can go wrong when you are trying to build a process or anything like that. And it was a portfolio of over 30 countries. So that was an opportunity to see a lot of things that can go wrong actually going wrong. And that is the moment when I noticed that AI was making a comeback. And because this was something that I've always been interested in, it seemed like a good option to come back into this. So that is when I took an AI certificate program in U of T, in the School of Continuing Studies. That's what we met. And it's been a very nice journey since, because that is when, or I think that opened the door for me to join Vector, because I had the theoretical background plus this updated know-how right now in terms of how to get things moving.
Excellent background, Andres, and thanks for reminding us that we actually met at University of Toronto when we were doing our certification on artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I must tell you, I was very impressed by your knowledge and how you were able to kind of look at the entire process and meticulously chart how we go through from the idea development of what model we want to have, what kind of system we want to have, to the deployment. And I think it's now it makes sense to me with your background in industrial engineering, kind of really allows you to look at the entire process in a very systematic manner. And that is very helpful. And thank you for sharing that. Now I have a question for you, because some of our audience members are students of McMaster University and other universities. Just reflecting back on your journey, what would be your advice that if somebody wants to end up with a high level positions as you have, vice president, director of various bigger organization, what do they need to do coming out of school?
It is a good question because there are multiple paths. I don't think there is a single answer to this. Um, if you go through if your background is more technical, I would say certainly you want to specialize and become known for actually delivering on the technical side. Reputation is very important. That's why the message basically that I'm trying to deliver. So if you actually build an expertise in an area, become well known for that expertise. Now, after you get that expertise, it's important also to expand because typically when you specialize, you know kind of a square millimeter of something really, really well. But it is important to look at opportunities to actually look at the problem from a different angle. Part of what you just brought up, Jody, in terms of looking at the full process, that is typically what is critical for actually achieving results when you are moving beyond an individual contributor role. When you are basically just, for example, solving one specific problem, you have the luxury basically to just pay attention to that square millimeter. But as you move through the organization, you need to be mindful of how the interactions happen, and having that broader scope or perspective is something that definitely will be a key element to achieve that seniority, basically.
Sounds good. So you're saying, yes, you've got your narrow expertise, but know the broader implications and how it connects to rest of the organization if you want to be more successful from the leadership perspective.
Exactly. There is another element, which is if you're coming from the other end, right? Let's say you're non-technical, you should still have some basic level of literacy to be able to talk and understand the technical challenges. I would say today, coding, generally speaking, it's similar to writing and reading, or basic math. You need to understand the fundamentals of it. Nobody says that you're going to be a master novel writer just because you know how to write. The same way, you don't need to be an expert programmer to say that you know some coding, but you need to understand the fundamentals just to be able to talk and understand what makes sense. Right?
Makes sense. And actually, to further your point, what I've heard, and I say that in some of the presentations that I give, is that previously we used to teach coding. Now we say that it's prompt engineering, that people should learn prompt engineering. But in the future, even the prompts are going to be, because it's natural language and AI is able to, if we can tell AI just in the natural language what we want it to do, AI such as GPT-4, it is able to create the right prompt for us as well. So then perhaps prompt engineering may not be as important. Then what's next is the problem solving. People should know how to kind of decompose or put the structure to the problem in a smaller sub problems so that they can look at it together and build a system around it. And I would love to hear your reflection about that.
Yeah, so even when you're coding, there is something that typically is called pseudocode, where you're not really coding, you're just articulating the steps in a logical way. And when you're looking at a bigger system, you're still doing the same. You're thinking, okay, even if you think about an organization, we humans interact that way. If you have finance, finance takes care of the money issues, but and you can do the abstraction of thinking of them as a big black box that is finance or HR or any other department. But then you can double click on that this big black box, and you will find a lot of complexity inside. So what I'm trying to say is this is not really about coding itself. It's about building the logic that enables you to encapsulate complex concepts in a way that you can manage them more easily. And then whenever required, you can, again, double click on that specific concept and get a better understanding of how it works. So I think that is a skill set that generally it's embedded in coding because then you're writing routines or subroutines or whatever, and then you package them into a procedure or a function, and then all of a sudden it's now encapsulated. So it's the same type of thinking. It's not necessarily connected with the syntax or the grammar of the language. It's about a mental skill that is required for coding, but it's not just for coding. It's for just thinking in a structured way.
Sounds good. So are you saying that we should still teach our students coding?
To be honest, yes. The same way that I think you still need to teach people to write by hand, even though you have computers. It doesn't need to be cursive, but the point is there are some skills that you acquire while practicing those things that are transferable, right? And coding is it's a way that it's similar to math in the sense that either you get the result or you don't. There are some other areas, for example, if you're talking about arts, you could say the same things about art. The problem with any art in general is that there is always room for people saying, yeah, but I like it better this way, which kind of defeats the purpose in the sense that you're trying to acquire a technical skill, so to speak. Um, and you see even the great painters like Picasso or people like that basically were very abstract in what they were doing. They still had the technique to actually do perfectly recognizable figures in their work, right? So basically, there are two things that are different. One is to get the technical skill, the concrete skill of how to do something. Another is how you choose to use it later.
Yeah. So
yeah.
in essence, you're saying that coding will give you the good grounding, good base, allow your mind to be trained on how to be talking with machines. And yes, the same thing then can be utilized for prompt engineering and then for problem solving later as well.
Exactly. And prompt engineering itself is that's the problem. There are many of these things that are just marketing names, including artificial intelligence. And at the end of the day, all of these terms are just a way to encapsulate concepts that are more complex. But yeah, you need the fundamental skills that are how do you think in a logical way to actually achieve the results that you're trying to achieve.
So I have a question. Let's say you have you are a mentor to somebody who is just entering university. They finished their grade 12. They're trying to decide which pathway to take. Where would you want them to go, knowing where GPT-4 is taking us, AGI is potentially coming by 2029 or so? At least that's what Kurzweil says of Google. Where would you want students to focus on? Which fields are best for them to enter?
It's a good question because it's very uncertain. I don't think at the university level things are going to completely disappear or evaporate. What will change is where we put our focus on. To give you an example, medicine. It's not that ChatGPT or any AI is going to completely replace doctor, but doctors are going to become a lot more proficient at, for example, diagnosing, because they will have tools like ChatGPT that will be able to digest all of these large quantities of information. Similarly, journalism. It's a field that has been identified as something that is at risk because today they require, or basically kind of a starting point for a journalist is you need to be able to write, or at least write at a decent quality level. And that requirement probably is going to soften. But the ability to find a good story or to make a point, it's still very human in terms of, again, you can get a chatbot to produce thousands of potential articles, but you need that human to say, but this is the one I like, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, it's similar to what happens with, for example, computers and art, or even you still need the fine motor skills to do a drawing, but now you have undo, right? Which is something that in art is a lot more expensive to do when you're painting on oil or anything like that. It makes your life a lot harder when you make a mistake. So what changes is the relative cost of the yield that you may have. But at the end of the day, I would say more than focused on a specific field, but I would say there are certain disciplines that I certainly recommend people to learn about. One of them is algebra, especially linear algebra or anything that is more mathematical in nature.
Sure.
It gives you a good language to understand a world where computers are your tools. All of these machine learning in general has very deep connections with those type of structures.
Sure.
So understanding vectors basically is something that is useful in this context because it gives you an abstraction of what the machine is doing. Um, the other one that I would also say, as I mentioned, coding. I think having at least computer coding 101 is useful.
Yeah.
Even if you've never coded again, right?
Yeah, just to have, as you said, actually, you're making me think maybe I should go and take now a new coding course. I've been so used to just doing the prompts now that after a while, the coding knowledge that you have starts to fade away because you don't use it. But you make a very good point. Just to keep your brain exercising in that format of structured thinking is very important to develop good AI systems, or even as a leader of organization where we may give people direction. If we are able to kind of put a structure to it, that the system that our people will create would be a lot better.
Yeah.
Definitely. So you are director of applied AI projects at Vector, as I mentioned earlier. What does your typical day look like? What are the things that you do on a daily basis?
It's very non-repetitive, so it's difficult to say about kind of a regular path. But generally, I'm meeting with companies trying to understand what are their needs in terms of, for example, areas where they think it would make sense to have better models working for them. That inspires a lot of what we do in terms of projects, because basically what our core for the projects is we're trying to decrease the cost for companies or organizations to explore the state of the art, right? Part of the problem with anything that you do that is state of the art is you're taking a huge risk.
Sure.
Because you don't know if it's going to work. You don't know if that is going to become mainstream or not. We started working with ChatGPT-like models in 2019, for example. Sure. And at the time, companies were participating and they were really engaged and saying, yeah, we're getting great results, and they implemented things there. But we didn't know ChatGPT was going to emerge and make such a significant shift. So just as we did that, we did many other technologies along the way that didn't catch as much as ChatGPT. So one thing is to do that. We're also talking with researchers, government, with anyone that really is in this space, to understand what's coming and how to prepare for that and how we can help along the way. We have a lot of interactions with small companies on the same line, because the big question now is adoption. How do you move from just research into getting something that is tangible and practical, and that is always a challenge, because the book is not fully written yet, right? We're still writing the book.
Yeah.
That is the game that we're playing.
And your researchers are some of the best in Canada, and to have them available to the financial institutions and other organizations that you work with, it's a big boon for them. It perhaps at a lot less cost, a lot more productive level than if they were to do it themselves.
Yes. So we don't do one-on-ones. So generally, I mean, let me just rephrase that. Our faculty and affiliates, they are welcome to do whatever they want. So they can do one-on-ones. It's just that typically they don't do that through Vector. What we do is we align multiple companies to explore a topic together. So, for example, anomaly detection or any topic at that level, we identified, I don't know, five, six algorithms that might be promising. Again, published within the last 6 months, maybe a year.
Sure.
And we implement those, and now they can use those algorithms as building blocks for trying their own use cases with those techniques. And we have the experts on the room, basically the people that build the code, the researchers, and so on, to help them along the way, together with data sets, compute, all the different elements. So it's a faster exploration than what they would have done on their own. And then we open source the code generally. So that is basically the role that we play. Is we accelerate that exploration.
So I guess it creates both efficiency, they could do it faster, and also cost effectiveness. If they were to hire your researchers, they'll have to pay significant amounts. I heard like Tesla is now starting to pay, Elon Musk has starting to pay more than $1 million to some of the AI engineers.
It is a space where salaries can be quite high. That is part of the reason for Vector to exist, because Vector was designed to actually mobilize resources. So the universities move slower. So when there is someone brilliant in a university that receives an offer letter from Google, it could take years for the university to say, hold a second, actually we can offer you something better than what you have today. Maybe it's not at the level to Google, but or Tesla in this case, but Vector can offer a mix where, in addition to money, we can offer the freedom of doing the research that they want to do, and pulling together all of these bright minds. And again, Jeff Hinton is part of our is our chief scientific advisor, and that creates significant reputational boost.
He's just an amazing individual. With he's really considered the forefather of artificial intelligence, the way we are seeing it. And there's a lot of developments with Jeff Hinton. Now he's left Google, etc. We can talk about that in a while. But I did want to talk about AI projects for a few moments, because you are the expert in how best to run AI projects within organizations. What are some of the tips and tricks that you can share with other parties, whether it's the McMaster AI Society or our alumni? They are starting to run AI projects within their companies. What are the things considerations that they need to keep in mind?
So I typically like to make a distinction between there are some things that are important to keep in mind because AI is AI, and there are some that you need to keep in mind because AI is new, right? So sure. I'm going to start with the ones that are because AI is new. There is a lot of things that organizations as a whole are not prepared for. And there are things that are, for example, data governance. The data structure that organizations have created tends to be focused on the traditional data sets that we needed for just any other IT project. Yes. When you have an AI project, you need a lot more interconnections. And quite often what happens, for example, with the existing legacy data governance structure that we have, is the number of approvals that you need to get in order to get one project off the ground is just crazy. So we've had instances working with financial institutions where the project itself, the model basically took 2 weeks to build, and then it took 9 months to get the approvals, to give you an example. Then similarly, there are other things like, does your compliance team know how to audit this model? Well, does your audit team know how to audit the model that you're building? That's your so there are a lot of layers that we've built in organizations to ensure that we have things moving smoothly that that may not be fine-tuned for AI. So that is one big family of things. Similarly, how do you choose the use cases? That again is another type of thing where it's not that it's a completely new thing, but you need to fine-tune it for AI.
Sure.
Now, putting those things, those are the ones that I would bucket in the AI is new, therefore the organization may, not all the processes may be ready for AI. There are
Yeah.
other things that are more AI specific, like um, you need a pipeline, basically a technical pipeline that is checking for data set shift, right?
Sure.
Because behavior changes over time, and
Yeah.
these models are very good at honing in specific behaviors.
Yeah.
They may be completely off base way faster than your traditional rule-based models, right? That have broader strokes, if you want. The type of checking that you need to do is slightly different.
Sure.
So the other piece
There's,
is
yeah.
knowledge, right? You basically you have GPUs instead of CPUs. Things at that level also make an impact in terms of the technical skill set that you have supporting the project.
Sure.
One
Wow. So those are amazing. Thank you for those tips and tricks. One of the things that you mentioned is the interconnectivities between databases. So what you find is companies have these databases, but they're not interconnected, and each database is under really another approver. Maybe it's sitting in a different department, and then that's why the approvals are needed for that. What can companies start to prepare their databases even in advance of their AI system development? Like knowing that perhaps they're going to have some party like Vector Institute to work with in 3 months down the line. How can they start preparing now with regards to the data?
Again, there is not an easy answer to that because there are valid reasons why things were designed the way they are. Typically, they have to do with privacy, cybersecurity, that type of element. So you can't just go ahead and say, okay, so let's put everything in just one place and everything will work. There are a lot of other things in terms of architecture and so on. One thing that I have seen companies actually doing is not really on the technical side, where still they are pulling data together on an ad hoc basis, but it's on the governance side, where you have a group of people that are in charge of AI initiatives.
Sure. Yeah.
So they have a broader mandate, right? And they can pull resources from different silos. So they are the ones that are kind of the oil in trying to get these communications flowing faster. And as organizations do more AI projects, they become better at basically figuring out who needs to approve what and how do you provide the comfort level for them to move forward. So there is a lot of trial and error. The other piece of advice there would be don't start with your dream project. Start with smaller things that have more tangible impact and that you can pull off to build credibility internally in the organization. After you start building that know-how, it becomes a lot easier. While the other scenario where you start with saying, "Hey, we're going to do the full transformation of the organization now," typically it takes years and it fails, and then it's a lot harder for the second project to get approval. So I would say having some demonstrations typically is quite useful. The proof of concept.
No, that's amazing. It's like the low hanging fruit and small wins that show to people that what you're doing is going to matter to the company, and then they start to open up the locks that they had put on.
And it creates a culture because at the end of the day, the problem, and this goes back to the point that I was making that AI is new, is you don't know where you're going to find a process or something that doesn't work nicely when you try to do machine learning on top of it. So the only way to discover it is basically you encounter it, right? Again, you need to have some sensitivity to the point and be aware that you're doing something that is structurally different. And therefore, you need to trigger those conversations. But that means you need to reach out to legal, compliance, all of the other groups in the organization that are gatekeepers, if you want, in advance to have those conversations early.
Yes, definitely. And thank you for saying that. As you know, my specialization is in AI governance, and I'm so glad that you brought AI governance into play. And the fact that it is a solution to some of the hindrances that a company faces in having the resistance, because somebody told me as I did my PhD research, they said legacy systems are connected to legacy mindsets. And so with new AI governance, perhaps we need to have new mindsets first involved because we need them. And as you said, a new culture, and perhaps the CEO of the organization can kind of lead that effort. But the question that I had for you, just digging deeper on your comment on AI governance and how it can be helpful, is where do you see the governance coming from? Is it at the board level, or is it at the exec level, or one level down?
So I think everyone has a role to play in governance, right? So definitely when we're talking at the board level, I would expect them to be more focused on the strategic guidance and basically ensuring sustainability of the business in the long run, right? So I would say at that level, my expectation is that they should identify AI as something disruptive or potentially disruptive that requires attention. So basically, I think the messaging from the board goes in the line of saying, hey, we need to ensure that this is taken care of, and then also validating that the things are being done properly. Then at the executive level, of course, they are the ones that are really driving the ship in this case, or in the organization. So they are the ones that need to give a message saying, yes, we're going to be doing it. And also they need to allocate resources to make those things happen. And then the next layer is the actual, I would say, more practical level, typically at the director or VP level, where they are the ones that would be heading these committees, where they would be trying to identify what is the risk appetite that we have as an organization, what are the guardrails that we need to play here, to try to balance basically the opportunity with the risk. So basically, I would say when you talk about mandates, what I've seen that is happening more typically than not is that you have a CTO, CIO, or in some cases the CEO saying, giving kind of the go ahead to the initiatives. But I would say still generally not that common that it's the CEO that does it. I don't know if it is needed, to be honest. But yeah, you need somebody from senior management that is having that flag and saying, yes, we're moving forward.
So you're saying we don't really need the CEO because CEO is such a busy individual, like making new deals with external organization in many different areas, not just artificial intelligence. So having CIO, CTO, maybe chief AI officer, maybe the one that is kind of holding the flag.
Yes, and the other point to this is how much time is the CEO going to have to dedicate to this? Because the problem is because it's new, you need a lot of energy to actually reshape the organization in that direction. So it's difficult for the CEO to take that on their own because they are also focusing on market situations. They're focusing on regulatory issues. They're focusing on many other points that are part of their domain. So sometimes it becomes more of a distraction. So again, I don't think there is a hard rule, but generally, I would say a role like I said, CIO, CTO, or as you mentioned, the chief AI officer, any of them could be that voice. But it is important that they have that visibility and they have that focus. Because it is systemic. It's not something that you can do a point change and say, yep, now we are AI ready. You need to touch pretty much every single department.
All the departments, definitely. And that's where the collaboration would be needed of different C-level officers under the guidance of the chief AI officer, for example. But at the board level, do you find that boards have a specific committee to deal with artificial intelligence, or is it being dealt by, let's say, a risk committee or audit committee?
Well, I don't have as much visibility over the inner workings of the boards in general, but what I can tell you is I do see it more as a next step in the digital transformation type of strategies. Um, it's kind of a natural next step for that journey. So that has, of course, risk elements attached to it. Um, Maybe the other piece that I will mention is I don't think it should be treated as a technical element. It's more of a cultural element. We are building now a framework in terms of how do we articulate this in terms of how you move from this concept of AI to the reality of AI. And the framework basically starts with setting up principles at the high level. That's the quotation mark easy part, in the sense that you just need to say directionally, this is what makes sense. Then it goes into AI literacy. Then we move on to structure or governance structure. Yeah. And then the last level is the tools and practices, which, and that bucket on its own has probably like 15 sub buckets of things like MLOps, identifying biases, dataset shift I mentioned before, and so on. Yeah. That require a lot of granularity in terms of how do you actually build that piece to be effective. But again, that is the layer where you see technical stuff. Yeah. The other layers are more culture and are more around risk management, right? Yes, and thank you for saying that that all these components are required, and it's a lot more than technical. Whether it's the collaboration, risk management, cultural shifts, and setting the right tone at the top as well, so that we are going to take these risks, although the risks exist, but we are moving forward. Yeah. In a way, I see it similar to saying who's in charge of the internet in your organization. Someone is paying the bill, that's certain. But it is something that permeates absolutely everything that people do. You need cultural awareness of how to use it without exposing the organization to cybersecurity risks or without doing the wrong thing, like I don't know, publishing things in something that has visibility outside of the organization that it shouldn't have. That type of thing requires culture. And yes. I think AI is basically it's another tool. But again, it's like Excel. It's not that you have one office that is the one that uses Excel. It's everywhere, right? It's everywhere. Everybody can use this tool, definitely. So, but one of the key risks that I've found in my research is as companies are starting to deploy GPT-4, one of the key issues that they have is they're concerned about privacy. And how do you think that companies are dealing with it and still kind of moving forward? What are some of the tips and tricks that they are using? So there are two things that are different, right? One is generative AI, as basically somebody else is the supplier of these models. And in that case, I've seen basically two big strategies. One is to sign contracts with the companies that are supplying, saying, I swear I will not use this in a way that you didn't allow me to use. The other type of things is just having people instructed not to put anything that is of private nature in these machines. But again, right now, all of these are very soft guardrails that will become stronger as time passes by. But because they have not been tested on courts, they have not been exposed to real challenges, it's difficult to know whether they are actually working. The other family of things has to do with the models that you are building yourself. Yeah. Because the problem that you may encounter there is you are using data to train the model, and then there is data leakage, or there is some other problems related with privacy around that. And sure. there are technical considerations. So there are techniques like federated learning, multi-party computation, homomorphic encryption, and so on that can help you deal with that. But the other thing is, again, governance in terms of having the financial industry has a model that is called the the three lines of defense,
Yeah.
right? That generally seems to do the work in the sense that you have the first line that is probably 99% of the employees of an organization.
Yeah.
That is the actual people doing stuff.
Yeah.
And then you have the second layer that is the people that are looking at what the first line is doing and
Yeah.
let's say commentating on it or saying this is what you should do, right?
Yeah.
So they are the ones that typically are calling into question whether the practices are reasonable or not. And then the last part, the third line audit, is typically looking at things after the fact and saying whether you were actually doing what you should have been doing and basically having lessons learned, if you want, in terms of how to fix things. That is a model that, in my mind, seems to work very nicely too, where you have clear accountability and ownership of pieces of that governance.
The three lines of defense. But do you find that the companies are ready? Are the three lines of defense are ready to do this job?
It's a good question. The financial industry has actually been putting a lot of effort into ensuring that it is, because it was already a mature enough model. The question is whether the technical talent, for example, to challenge what the first line is doing is fully there in the second and third line. And I think they are moving in that direction. And that is part of the reason why they're very cautious in terms of what they are building, right? They are the first line is, again, whatever they build, it goes through a lot of layers of approval because they don't want to end up in the newspapers for the wrong reason. And then the second and third layers are basically all the time trying to learn and catch up with the technology. And the same thing with the regulators. Regulators are also having a hard time trying to secure the same level of expertise on AI that the industry has.
Yeah.
And this is not exclusive to financial industry. I'm just more familiar with that one. That's why I'm using it as an example. But that is the game that we're playing right now. There needs to be a lot of this talent that is right now kind of very concentrated in young people in technical domains needs to permeate through the whole organizations.
Yeah, and actually, you brought the regulator in. OSFI recently did a survey of various organizations on what are they doing with artificial intelligence and machine learning and how they're using it. And so the people that are that have managed that survey is presenting it to OSFI, and I'm actually they're doing a 2-day training. So I am another presenter. I am the second presenter, and they want to bring me in for a broader view. Like almost like an intra-industry view to bring in reflections from what the survey may say. It's narrow on the financial institutions, but what's the broader view of artificial intelligence and where it may be going over next 5-10 years, and how should financial institutions be ready? But because that training is that I'm giving them is coming up in a couple of weeks, I will ask you a question, and perhaps you could, as my guide to them, you could reflect on where do you think this GPT-4 is going? Do you think that it is, whether it's GPT-4 or Claude 3 or Gemini, are we moving towards AGI by 2029? Where are your thoughts on this?
Difficult because AGI is not well defined. So what, for example, if you go back to the 50s and 60s, people were saying when we have a computer that can defeat a human chess player, a master on chess, basically, then we'll have AGI. And we crossed that milestone, and we're not calling it AGI, and I don't think we should, by the way. Similar things were said about Go. Right. Again, the moment that we have Go players, then that's it, or any computer game or whatever. So I don't think we have a good understanding of what AGI means. It's again one of these marketing terms that don't necessarily. I mean, they're easy to grasp, but when you try to put a strong definition around them, it's kind of nonsensical. If you ask me, will we ever be truly uncertain of in any context whether what we have in front of us is a computer or a person, I don't think that is going to happen in 2029. If it ever happens, like kind of Terminator that have the skin on top of a robot, and then when you're looking at it, you don't know what it is. I don't think that's happening in 2029. If you're talking about a chatbot that sometimes you don't know if you're talking with a chatbot or a human, I think that already happened.
That's already happened. Yeah.
So I, yeah, I don't think that the question about AGI is that relevant, to be honest. Because it's the same thing as saying, is this a specific program, for example, artificial intelligence? Well, there are so many lines. You can do rule-based systems that are extremely complex, that are indistinguishable from an outsider from a neural network. Um, so again, it's a difficult question. I don't think it's going to change dramatically from that perspective. I think the big leap already happened, the one that we wanted to see, and now it's going to get a lot better. And it's going to permeate into a lot of different uses. But I don't know what the next surprise is going to be, because if I knew it wouldn't be a surprise.
Yeah, I agree. But here's the thing with AGI, as you rightfully mentioned, the definition is so diversified. It keeps on changing, and depending on who is looking at it. Initially, they were looking at the Turing test, and now Turing test seems to have met. But what you are now starting to look at is robotic embodied artificial intelligence as a reflection for AGI. But let's say if the body was not a consideration, then perhaps we will go towards by 2029, we may be meeting bulk of what human minds can do potentially.
Fair. So the point is, it's difficult to imagine a human mind without a body. And by that, I'm not talking that you need robotics, but the point is you have a conception of high and low, of cold and hot, and so on, that informs a lot of the metaphors that you think with. So, and those can be mimicked by a chatbot. But again, the question is that fully there? And even if it is the stochastic parrot type of question? Is it just mimicking, or is it going beyond that? So to be honest, I'm not really that focused on those questions. For me, I like the equivalence principle that says if I think Einstein used it for relativity, where they were saying if you have a lab basically spinning around the Earth, and you are in that lab and you do experiments like dropping things and whatever, you wouldn't necessarily know whether you are attached to gravity, that is what's making it fall, or if it is the rotation that you're doing. And in that case, basically you choose whatever model makes more sense to you, and you go with it. So in my mind, it's similar. If you have an entity on the other side of the screen that you can distinguish whether it's human or not, even if you ask the question, the computer or the basically you are going to receive an answer that makes sense. Not really sure if at that level you would treat them differently, because functionally they are indistinguishable.
They're still doing the same work as they were doing before, but now at a higher level. But then the question takes us to the existential risk. So yes, they become more and more intelligent. At some point, your chief scientific officer, Jeff Hinton, has left his job at Google several months ago, last year. And he has said he's now there to talk about the existential risk, and he's saying it's real. There was a statement that was issued that was signed by Demis Hassabis and Sam Altman, and they said that it is as big as pandemics and nuclear war. So I guess the thing is, as it starts to go higher up in intelligence, are you concerned that it may start to, whether in the hand of a bad actor or through its own sentience, can get out of hand?
So let me start with the last part that you said. Can it get out of hand? I think the answer is yes, especially when there is a bad actor. But I think the question always is, what is the things that you can do in the short term around it? Uh, because at the end of the day, you don't jump into the long term, right? What you do is you walk one step at a time in many short terms until eventually you are in what today you said is the long term. So for me, the question is not really about whether that future can happen, because to be honest, I don't know. What I do know is that in each of the short steps in the present, we can do things to ensure that whatever it is that we are building is safe and trustworthy. So for me, that is kind of the real crux of the problem. That whatever we are doing today, we need to ensure that it is something that we are keeping safe. By having explainability attached to it, by having auditability attached to it, by having accountability tied to human beings, by having the legal frameworks that are going to inform that development and put incentives in terms of what needs to be built. Um, so hopefully we will never need to actually have to answer the question that you're asking, which is, will it ever happen? Well, if we build things in a reasonable way, we should never get to the point where we are about to make that last call to say, if I press this switch, then it's the end of the world. Now, the point is, as with, I don't know, climate change or any of the other threats that we have, it's about what we do today. It's not thinking about, I don't know, 100 steps in the future. Is let's fix it now. So it doesn't become a bigger problem in the future.
Yeah, no, that's a very good advice that people should, companies should work towards dealing with all these incremental things, the risk management things, make sure that they are put into place. Instead of thinking too much into the long term, actually, one of the things that I say to organizations, that if you have 100% budget available and 95% of that, use it for your AI opportunities and immediate risk management, near-term risk management, like as you mentioned, privacy, explainability, and bias and fairness, etc. But 5%, I call it the 5% rule that I've developed. At least 5% of your attention, keep it on existential risk, just in case if there are things that we're missing and there's a fast takeoff.
And you can see the announcement by the federal government last Sunday on the 2.4 billion on infrastructure and AI. The full package, 2.4 billion, 50 million of the 2.4 billion is what is focused on this institute that will be more geared towards the existential risk, right? So that is in line basically what you're saying. Hey, there is a big chunk of money or a big chunk of resources or attention into let's make people's life better. But still keep in mind that these things you shouldn't forget about it. And you should have some people, highly talented people, thinking about these to prevent it from ever happening, right? That is the balance, I think.
Yes. Thank you for always having positive outlook on the future, Andres. Oh my God, I really enjoyed this conversation. This was amazing. I was going to spend 15 minutes less, but I guess we went till the end of our time that's available for this conversation. But thank you very much. Very impressed with your tips and tricks that you have shared with our audience. And looking forward to having even future conversations. Maybe every year or so, we should reconnect and do another podcast with you to get your advice and insight.
Well, thank you very much, Jody. It's very nice to talk with you, and certainly I think this type of communities like the AI Society have a very strong impact in shaping the future. So definitely this is what we need to do more of. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres, and thank you to our audience members for listening. And off to your work and business, whatever you want to pay attention from this point onwards. And adios for now. Cheers.
Thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Nerds and Notes, the Mac AI podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening in to this month's episode, and as always, we hope to see you next time. If you liked listening to this episode, then please be sure to rate us and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. To subscribe to our newsletters and get monthly updates on our upcoming events and initiatives, please visit our website at mcmasterai.com. You can also get this information by following us on Facebook at McMasterAI or on Instagram at MacAI Society. If you're interested in supporting this podcast, you can become a sponsor by contacting us on social media or by emailing us at macai@mcmaster.ca. Sponsorship comes with amazing benefits, like advertising on our website and on the shows themselves, the opportunity to join us as a guest, participation in our networking events, and more.
The MacAI Society expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, reliance on, or inability to use this podcast or information presented in this podcast.